Hey, how's it going? Welcome back to the Learn Talk training program. Bianca and I hope you're learning and feeling more at home here. Today, we're going to walk you through our teaching principles. Let's start off with a review of what we learned during last session. Do you remember we ended our last session with our overall learning goals? Try to think about how to achieve these goals before you teach a lesson and reflect on them after you finish teaching as you type up your lesson report.
How can you achieve them? Well, a good way to start is by asking yourself a simple set of questions after every class. Questions like, was I effective at teaching all the target language? What did I do to make the lesson fun? Did I adapt the material to suit my students' interests and level? Was I able to cover all target language in time? These should help you identify what areas you need to improve on and keep you aligned with our goals.
Thinking about these goals after every lesson will help you become a better teacher. Now let's talk about our teaching principles. I'm sure by now you're familiar with the 5 central principles we have here. They summarize all the roles and responsibilities you'll have as a Learn Talk teacher. Let's go through a quick overview of them. Number 1, get to know your student. Number 2, you are a facilitator. Number 3, speak English and English only. Number 4, listening and speaking first, reading and writing second. Number 5, show, don't tell.
Let's take a closer look at the first one. Get to know your student. Aside from being an expected responsibility of yours, it's a principle that comes first and foremost, since we feel that effective learning cannot take place if there is no relationship between student and teacher.
That's why each of our lessons start off with a set of warm-up questions. They serve to break the ice between you and your student and are designed to get you to talk and get to know each other before diving into the lesson. Be sure to have answers to them yourself before you ask them, so you can introduce some details about yourself during this phase as well.
As much as possible, keep the conversation going during this phase. If your student struggles answering a question or simply doesn't understand, don't attempt to simplify it. Just move on to the next warm-up question. Also, avoid interrupting and correcting major mistakes during this phase. Remember, the objective of these questions are to 1. Introduce yourself. 2. Get to know details about your student. Very useful for giving examples later. 3. Break the ice. 4. Establish the lesson objectives.
The student's answers and your answers to these questions should set the context for the lesson. It's a good way to start, and you want to keep this part as lively and animated as possible so you can ride on the energy while you switch to the next phase of the lesson.
Now, before we cover the next phase of the lesson, you must understand what one of your key roles is. You are a facilitator.
What comes to your mind when you think of this word facilitator? Try and think about the difference between a teacher and a facilitator. What are the similarities?
In this way, Learn Talk teachers are a bit different from traditional educators. After all, with our learning environment being essentially a one-on-one situation, your student should have 100% of your attention and will be expecting it. How do we show that? By asking prompt questions as naturally and confidently as possible. Also, make sure to give a lot of time to your students to answer the questions. Sometimes it takes a while for them to respond. Remember, you want them talking as much as you.
Aside from resisting the urge to interrupt or hurry your student, you'll also need to remember to speak in English and English only. Principle number 3. If you're not a native English speaker, it's inevitable that you'll sometimes want to translate examples in your native tongue first. Please avoid this. Also, keep your student away from those translation dictionaries as much as possible while the lesson is taking place.
You can explain to them that they can always look up words in the dictionary after the lesson is over. You want to maximize time with them. And trust me, if they're looking everything up, even on Google, it will eat heavily into your time. explain the definitions using our teaching techniques instead.
Also, don't forget our lessons are designed to give students as many opportunities to practice their speaking and listening. Although there will be activities that involve reading, for example, the dialogue and showtime rules, reading and writing are secondary tools to instruction, our fourth principle.
That doesn't mean you won't be doing any writing though. If you feel like a student has trouble pronouncing a word, or if it took them a while to infer, please write it on the whiteboard in order to reinforce their learning.
Also, if you see your student writing down a lot of vocabulary words, encourage them to answer your question first. Another major time eater is when they start writing everything down. If possible, continue asking questions to keep the conversation going. Some of your students might not be used to this method. However, they'll absorb the language quickly if they're learning through listening and speaking first.
Yes, and that brings us to our fifth and last principle. Show, don't tell. This perhaps has the most influence over how we teach and is essential to doing things the Learn Talk way.
Grammar is taught in many ways today. At Learn Talk, we do things differently by teaching grammar rules and giving the student the space to experiment. The more errors they make, the more chances you can correct them and give them the proper grammar structure.
It is absolutely essential that you do not explain the grammar structure directly to the student, because we want our students to learn on their own how it works. This method takes some time to get used to, and you might find some students resisting at first or getting frustrated by the overload of questions that you'll be asking them, but stick to it. Showing them how to use the grammar by giving clear examples is the best way for them to learn on their own.
So that's pretty much it for the teaching principles at Learn Talk. To recap what we've learned, you must, number one, think about how to achieve Learn Talk's learning goals before and after the lesson. Number two, engage in authentic and facilitated warm-up discussion. Number three, facilitate. Remember that your role is a facilitator and that your student must be speaking as much as you are. Number four, speak English only and don't let your student translate in class. Number five, listen and give your students time to respond to your questions. And finally, number six, show, using examples and then get them to repeat them. Don't tell them how to use the grammar.